This courageous conversation was recorded at Griefline's Let's Talk About Grief Impact and Fundraising event on August 22nd, 2024. In this discussion, we bring to light the often overlooked challenges of grief in the workplace with honesty and empathy. Grief doesn't simply end when you return to work. Join Griefline ambassadors Stephanie Chiu, Sally Douglas and Imogen Carn as they share their deeply personal stories and survey insights, highlighting the urgent need for better workplace support for grieving employees.
Stephanie Chiu, if you'd like to come up and take a seat. Stephanie is facilitating our deeply personal and impactful discussion today. Stephanie is an ambassador of Grieflines who is deeply committed to helping others navigate grief and loss. After the unexpected death of her husband, Stephanie moved to the mountains in northern Thailand with their 2 children and drew on her 20 years of mindfulness and meditation practice to heal. She experienced profound inner peace and connected with love, freedom and joy. Since returning to the Australian coast and motivated by her own journey, she has been guiding others to use mindfulness and meditation as powerful tools for self-care. With a steadfast belief in equality and justice, Stephanie has dedicated her career to human rights and peace building, living in diverse cultures such as Afghanistan, Pakistan, Fiji, Sweden and the US. As a storyteller, she has produced radio and podcasts to amplify women's voices and foster awareness, empathy and change. Her story is one of transformation, resilience and unwavering commitment to justice and equality. Welcome, Stephanie.
We'd like to welcome our panellists, Sally Douglas and Imogen Carn. Sally and Imogen are the co-hosts of the Good Morning Grief podcast and the authors of Good Morning, Honest Conversations About Grief and Loss. They bring their first-hand experiences of sudden loss and their journey in creating a supportive online community. Through their partnership with Griefline, they collaborated on the development of our ebook, How to Support a Grieving Friend, which has been downloaded over 5,000 times. Sally and Imogen both faced the sudden loss of their mothers while navigating their professional lives. Their journeys, alongside insights from a survey of 1,500 respondents, will shed light on the significant gaps in workplace support for grieving employees. So the panel discussion today aims to inspire change and to foster a more compassionate approach to grief in our workplace. Welcome panel. Thank you.
Alan, and thank you so much for being here today to share your stories. So we actually ended up on the same plane in exactly the same row and then shared a taxi from the airport to the hotel. So we've had some time to catch up, which has been really good. And I know that you two, I know your story, you really bonded over the sudden loss of both of your mothers. And from that time, you've really come together and used your curiosity about your experiences of grief and really achieved some remarkable things. You know, you've launched this podcast, you've published a book, and then you've created this really beautiful, buoyant community of people who are interested in dealing with grief. And that's amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. But I want to just take us back to a more difficult time. So, Sal, you had, when your mum passed away, when your mum died, you, like most people who have lost a close person, a loved one, you had to return to work, and that was really difficult. Can you tell us about your experience?
Absolutely. So my mum Rose died in November 2019 from a sudden seizure. As you can tell from my accent, she was based in the UK. So I found myself within 24 hours of finding out about her death. I was on a flight back to the UK. I had to sort out her funeral. I had so much to do. And I think what a lot of people don't realise unless they've been through it is on top of dealing with grief, there's often so much more stress when it comes to the admin, or as Im and I like to call it, deadmin. So I was really lucky that I actually had a very compassionate boss and a very compassionate workplace who gave me 2 months off to be able to sort out the estate, to be able to spend time back in the UK, and I really did need that. But my experience was one of just great shock and a lot of practical things that I had to do, as well as then dealing with the grief.
And then you had a different experience, didn't you? So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I did have a different experience. So I was in my other life, I guess pre my mum dying, I was working in TV production, and then I fell pregnant, and then I had a baby, and when my baby was 9 months old, my mum died by suicide, and it was the most devastating thing and completely out of the blue, and it was a very complex situation. She didn't suffer from mental health issues. She was a victim of domestic and family violence and coercive control, and I had no idea what coercive control was at the time either. So as you can imagine, juggling new motherhood and this huge explosive loss that had just happened in my life, everything turned upside down, and I was severely traumatized. My grief was all-encompassing. I was ruminating constantly. I just felt like a shell of my former self. And so the idea of going back to work in TV production on big entertainment shows was just far cry from where I was at. And the thought of going back to work was so terrifying and anxiety-inducing that I never went back to TV. And so, I was so fortunate that I did meet Sal at a support group for motherless daughters when I was desperately searching for somebody that I could relate to, that could tell me, yes, I'm feeling, anxiety like you are, grief bombs are hitting left, right and centre. I'm experiencing grief brain, which is something that, we don't get educated on until we're in it. I was very fortunate to meet Sal, and then we embarked on this journey of creating conversations and talking about grief and starting the podcast and meeting incredible people along the way.
And I think just to add to that, a really important part of both of our grief and work stories is that for me, I went back to work after 2 months and I was firing on all cylinders, and I was showing up at client meetings and meeting deadlines and getting work done, and I questioned whether I was normal, what's wrong with me. Whereas Im's experience was, she couldn't face going back to that work environment. Everyone grieves so differently, and as we'll get onto in this conversation, it's a foundational piece of knowledge for anyone that's looking to support grievers in the workplace, is knowing that, actually there's no one size fits all, there's no one way that people respond to loss. Is really important, because I thought I was strange and I thought I wasn't grieving properly because I was able to cope and, manage my workload. But for me, it gave me a sense of stability, it gave me a sense of routine that I very much needed, and that's a really big insight that now reflecting back, I can see it was normal, but I thought it wasn't.
Yeah, so really two very different experiences. Yeah, and then from that place, about a year ago, you two both started getting really curious about how workplaces are supporting people in grief based on your own personal experiences. And so when you started investigating, I think you found there was a kind of dearth of knowledge and evidence out there about what workplaces are doing to support people with grief. So you decided to throw a question up on your socials, as you do, and you were inundated with responses from people. And so can you tell us about some of the challenges that people were talking about, the common challenges that people had in that survey? Was it 15,000 people or
1,500 people in
I always get
24 hours.
Mixed up, sorry.
No, that's fine.
1,500 people in how long?
24 hours.
So it just went off. So tell us about some of the challenges that you heard from people.
Yeah, so that survey came about, and Sal and I, we were really interested in how grief impacts people in the workplace especially. We feel like there weren't enough conversations happening or resources available, and we were researching ourselves and found that there were no statistics out there in Australia that talked about grief in the workplace. We found some in the US, but there weren't any here. And so we thought, well, we've got a large audience, so let's put the questions out to them. And we were so shocked at the responses that we had. Like, obviously people were craving just to talk about this issue because no one was. And we put one Instagram story up with a link to the survey and one in our Facebook community group. And like we said, we had 1,500 responses from people. And we were quite shocked at the results, and you'd be quite surprised, but I think there's a big misconception that grief is just sadness. but the top 3 challenges that our community were facing when returning to work after loss was anxiety, brain fog, and exhaustion. So I think that might be quite surprising for people who haven't experienced a significant loss.
And if you think about those 3 things in the context of work, a place where you really need to be focused and, present and feeling together, if you're feeling anxious and exhausted and you've got brain fog and on top of that perhaps, unsupported, it's not really conducive to performing well at work and being, like Lou and Kate mentioned earlier, grief, if not supported, it can impact our mental health, and that's very much the same for grief in the workplace, and that's what we found. That was really echoed throughout the results of our survey, a real feeling from our community that there wasn't enough support. And in fact, one of the stats that we found was 22% of respondents, so that's almost a quarter, said they received absolutely no support on returning to work. Grief is something we're all going to go through. It's a universal human experience. No one is exempt. So that really shocked us because that is quite a large percentage. And I think it's really about having compassionate conversations. For me personally, from lived experience, when I went back to work, my boss she treated me as a human first and employee second, and was really compassionate in her communication with me and really clear about the time that I could have off, really clear about giving me agency as to how the rest of the team were notified about what had happened, and letting the team know how to communicate with me, taking me off emails and just letting me know that I could take the workload stress off my mind for the immediate future and just focus on the grief. They're just some really simple ways and strategies that can be implemented, and it's not huge or hard to do. It really is human-centered and very compassionate. But for me, from lived experience, that really helped. And I think for people out there who are feeling so unsupported when they go back to work, just having really simple things like that, it can make a really big difference, can't it?
Definitely. And I think another alarming statistic that came back was that 79% of people felt like they didn't have adequate time off to even process their loss. And if you think about it, we get on average, I think, 2 days bereavement leave here in Australia, which if you think about it is not long at all. And there's no way that I could physically even gone back to work 2 days after my mum's suicide. And, when we talk about brain fog, I think a lot of people don't realise what happens is grief can actually rewire your brain. So you're not functioning in the way that you were prior to your loss. We actually interviewed an excellent neurologist, Dr. Lisa Schulman, and so she explained to us it's like a traumatic injury to your brain when you experience a significant loss. So if you think about that, we're having to go back to work often 2 days after a significant loss. Our brains aren't functioning. There's a lot of cognitive changes happening, and it can be really difficult. And on top of that, your loss is often not being acknowledged in the workplace. So it's very compounding and very alarming, those statistics. And there's a lot of work to be done, I think.
Yeah, there's some really big gaps. Even in a workplace that I was at recently, one of our team members passed away really unexpectedly, suddenly. And the suggestions were, EAP's available. Now, I don't know about anyone else in the audience, but EAP is not considered a place where you want to go to deal with heavy-duty grief. It's very light on, and it feels really inadequate. So no one went to that service. I recommended Griefline. But look, what else have you found out about, the kind of supports that can help people? I mean, you've offered some insights there. What else do you think workplaces can do beyond offering EAP, Griefline? What are some of the other resources that they could do to support their staff?
Yeah, well, I think when it comes to people not having that time off, that adequate time off, I think if you can offer some sort of flexibility for them, whether that's reduced working hours, flexibility when it comes to attending appointments, dealing with all the deadmin like Sal mentioned, counselling appointments as well. Even if you're in a position to be able to offer like a hybrid role for a little while, so working from home. We have heard from our community members who were able to work from home. They found that a lot easier when they had to transition back into the workplace, just having that time to themselves to be able to work, in their own comfort zone. So those can be some of the little things that you can implement that can be helpful.
I think as well, one of the most powerful things and most helpful things that you can do is to have a workplace and team members who are educated on grief. It's one of the best things that you can do, to be honest. Having training in the workplace and having a team that understands how to support one another when these things happen, because Im and I very much our work, and same as Griefline, same as you, Steph, it is grounded in lived experience, because like Tim mentioned earlier, it's one of the most powerful things when it comes to coping with life's difficult situations, and training that encompasses lived experience is not only a great way to teach people and train people, because people connect to stories, don't they? They connect to real stories and real human experiences, but also connect to each other. And so I think that's one of the greatest things that you can offer, and to have a supportive workplace where people truly get it.
Yeah, I think that's a great note to leave us on, and I feel like that the importance of grief literacy and linking into what Griefline does, it's so essential. So thank you so much, Sal and Im, for being here.
Thanks for having us, and thanks to the Griefline. It's so needed, and more conversations definitely need to happen. So.